Okay, this is going to be a really good episode. Okay, Charles, as the co-executive producer of Magnum PI, please settle this question. Was Higgins actually Robin Masters?
The truth of the matter is, we never, ever, ever determined that. Kind of left it up in the air. I'll make it quick and say, I think he was. Tom thought he was, and Chris Abbott thought he was, but we never said for sure.
From the heart of Hollywood, it's the Patrick Labyorteaux Show with Patrick Labyorteaux.
It's the Patrick Labyorteaux Show. Patrick Labyorteaux. He's the one you gotta know.
Tonight's episode, Chaz Floyd Johnson.
Patrick Labyorteaux Show. He's the one you gotta know.
Okay, you know him as the multi-Emmy award-winning executive producer of Magnum PI, the Rockford File movies, Quantum Leap, JAG, and NCIS. I know him as my boss from JAG, who made everything okay. Please welcome the legend, Chaz Floyd Johnson.
Well, thank you for that,
Hey, Charles, how are you?
I'm good, and it's good to be with you.
Thank you so much for doing this. Now, okay, I did this. I did some digging here, as much as you can on the internet. I found out, why is this a surprise to me? I have no idea. You have 2 acting Emmys. How is this? I mean, you're an actor. You were on JAG. You played characters. What? And you got an Emmy for, what was it? The Rockford Files?
Well, I got an Emmy for the Rockford Files for producing.
Right, and then for the acting, how did that happen?
Well, I was in a group. I'll make it very short. I was in a group of actors. I came out here to be an actor. I don't know if you ever knew that. That was my reason for coming out.
Yeah.
And of course, serendipitously, I ended up in the producing area. But I always wanted to act, and so I got with a group of people: Robert Hooks, Denise Nicholas, and a number of people, Brock Peters, and formed a group.
Oh, I love Brock.
Called the Media Forum.
We used to do voiceovers together. He's got an amazing.
Oh, right, yeah,
he's got an amazing
great
voice. Yeah,
like you do. And so we started doing poetry, and we were doing it to raise money for the organization called the Media Forum. And eventually, we got so good at it, we traveled up and down the West Coast and other places doing the poetry. The 6 of us, and that literally. KCET, which is a PBS station, came to us and said, would you like to do a television special with this poetry? It's called Voices of Our People in Search of Black Poetry. So we did it, and then we ended up getting 10 Emmys, 6 for the actors,
wow.
And I won one for acting, which I never thought I would do, and one for producing that special. And it ran on PBS for a number of years, and I ended up getting 2 Emmys for that and 1 Emmy for producing the Rockford Files.
And plus, you were nominated for 1,000. So
well, I nominated several times for Magnum, for Rockford, and one other. So I've got about 7 or 8 nominations. Yeah.
Okay, so I've just so everyone's aware. No, I have not been nominated for an Emmy. I'm not. I watch the Emmys, but that's about as close as I get. When you're nominated, thank you. When you're nominated and when you win these Emmys, I guess, are they like children? Do you not have a favorite, or is there a favorite one that you're more proud of than the other?
Well, they're like your children in a way, but I probably am most proud. Well, I love the fact that I have an Emmy for performing, because that was what I wanted to do when I came out here. To get that as a goal, which wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, is great. But I think the one I'm most proud of, Patrick, is for the Rockford Files as a producer. I was a very, very young producer, very new to Hollywood. I had only been a producer. I'd been an associate producer for about maybe 3 years, and a producer for only 1, with David Chase and Stephen Cannell, wow, and Mita Rosenberg. They were the 4 of us, and my friend Juanita Bartlett later. And we got nominated in 1978 for the best drama in television. At that time, broadcast shows were getting nominated for Emmys. Now it's much harder to do. But
Yeah.
and we had been on the air about 3 or 4 years, and so when we got to the Emmys quickly, Steve said to me, Cannell said to me, "Do you think we win?" I said, "Are you curious? Are you serious? We're lucky to be nominated." Well, Lee Rich was the person who announced that category, and when he called the name of the Rockford Files as the best drama for the outstanding drama for the year, I was like in shock. And I was sitting there, and Steve got up, and Mita got up, and David got up, and I just sat there. And Juanita, who wasn't producing at the time, pushed me. She said, "They called your name." And so I went down and got on stage and got my Emmy, and I was holding it tight. And they had told us that at that time, you had to turn them back in for them to be engraved. And I thought, I'm never letting this go. They'll have to come to my house and pry it from my hands. But anyway, so I'm most proud of that.
Act 1, Beginnings. You came out as an actor, as you said, but before that, you were an Army JAG, a real JAG, right?
That's true. Well,
that's cool.
Here, I have the weirdest trajectory. I went to law school, and I was going to go to New York and go to acting school, Lee Strasberg or someplace like that.
Wow.
Neighborhood playhouse. And I'm an only child, and I'm adopted like you are. You and I never talked about that.
I never knew that.
Yeah, I never talked about it much, but I'm going to do it in my memoir that's coming out. But anyway, my parents said to me, you don't know anything about acting. I was from a little town in Delaware, and she said, you don't know anybody. You need to go and get more education. So I said, but I really want to go to the neighborhood playhouse. And they said, I tell you what, you go to law school for a year. And if you don't like it, then you can go off to New York and we'll support you. Well, they knew me better than I did. Yeah, because they knew me better than I did because I not only finished law school and passed the bar, and then practiced for a very short while in my life. But you went on to becoming a JAG. When I finished law school and passed the bar, well, I hadn't passed the bar when I went in. But when I went into the military, it was the Vietnam War was going on. And I ended up, because I had the law degree, getting assigned to Judge Advocate General, which is the Army version of as you know, because you played it for years, of the judicial branch. And who knew that when I finally got out here, and I was in it for 2 years, that I would end up being able to use that life meeting art on a series called JAG, which is not my first.
I'm going to jump ahead just for this one question because I want to kind of go in order. But since we're already there, you say that. I mean, so I can't imagine a more. I mean, there's not like. Yeah, there's cop shows, there's law shows, but there's not like JAG shows. JAG was it, kind of JAG and NCIS, of course, which is also one of your shows. What was your? I mean, they must have. Kind of once you leave the set, the actor has no idea of what you guys do. We know you, but we don't really know what's going on there. Was the law degree and your experience instrumental in what we were doing on the set on JAG?
Yes, absolutely. I thank my parents and the good Lord every day because I understood the basic principles of law because I had studied it. And I had worked in the legal department for the legal field for a little while, and I had to learn, as we all did, because it was one of the first major successful law series about the military on the air, as you know, and Don had been in the Marines, Don Bellisario, who created it, but he wasn't in JAG. And so there was a learning curve for all of us. But for me, when I was in JAG, I'll tell you this quickly because I know we're jumping ahead.
Yeah.
But when we started JAG, it had been, and you know this, it had been on NBC first. And and when it ended up not doing another year on NBC, unless Moonves picked it up for the next year, your first year had been a lot of harm rab flying, and there were no major sets. You didn't have a courtroom, You didn't have a workplace where you guys all worked. There was a set for the Admiral Chedwigan, John Jackson, and they would have a couple of fly sets they put up. So when I got there and talked to Don and Les Moon, they said, let's make it more of a law show. And that's when it turned much more into a legal show than a combination legal flying thing. And I had been in a office where I ran the office just like we have in JAG. So I said to Don, this is what we need to do. We need to have, a set
like
where,
a JAG Ops, like where
JAG Ops. And I forget the set designer from Australia who did it, but he created it, and the rest is history. But that was my experience, and so I always consider that my contribution to being able to make that work. Yeah.
Okay, so you do your stint at JAG before JAG. And then you come out to Hollywood. You do. You're going to classes. How does one transition from wanting to be an actor to being a producer? I mean, that's
but you see,
amazing.
So much of life for all of us is serendipitous. And I went to a school in Hollywood, El Centro and Santa Monica, called Professional Theater Workshop. And I had when I was in Washington, D.C., working in the copyright office before I came out here, we used to get copies of Variety and The Reporter because they had to be registered with each copy. And I would read them because, of course, I was interested in doing this. And I was acting in D.C. in little theater, community theater, a little bit of repertory I got to in the 3 years I was there before I came out here. So I was already had the GI Bill. So I had that. I went to Professional Theater Workshop. And while I was there, I needed a job because I was there like 9-10 months. And I thought, and I asked my mother and father for money. And they said, well, darling, if you need money, maybe you should come home and be a lawyer. So I thought, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. So I was in a play called The Sign in Sidney Brustein's Window with a friend of mine. And she said her husband was working out at Universal, was in the mailroom, and had just moved to business affairs. And that maybe I should go and have lunch with him and see how I could get a job there rather than working, waiting tables or working, in retail. And so I went and had lunch with him. He was a wonderful guy. He's now left us, Richard Milton. He introduced me to his boss. I didn't get on right away because they only said they had jobs in the mailroom, and they didn't want to hire me because they said I had too much education and I wouldn't last. Yeah, I wouldn't stay. So, but 6 months, not 6 months, maybe 3 months later, they were in a crush. They had my name. My friend kept pushing. They hired me. And 3 days after I was hired, there was a job opening up in business affairs. And I was a lawyer in business affairs, and it kind of worked. They hired me 3 days after being in the mailroom. And I was there for 3 years, working on about 10 or 15 shows as a bit, what they call a production coordinator. And one of the shows I worked on Night Gallery. I worked on $6 Million Man. I worked on Adam 12. I did all those shows. One of them was the Rockford Files. And and Cannell and Garner, James Garner, and Mina Rosenberg were doing it, and my friend Juanita Bartlett. David Chase wasn't on yet. He and I came on at the same time. And they had a kind of a problem with the show. They reorganized, and they called me one day in the production coordination department and said, you want to come down and talk to us? And I said, what about? Well, they said, we may need an associate producer. We want to see if you want to do it. And the rest is history. I said, can I think about it? I thought about it for about 24 hours. I thought, I could probably always choose to be an actor, because I can choose that, but I'm not always going to be chosen to be an associate producer. And that's how, the next day I was working. I knew nothing about being an associate producer, but I learned fast. I had a lot of people who helped me. And my job initially when I started was post-production.
Because you came from post-production supervising all the other shows, which basically takes care. Once you finish shooting on the set, everything after the film rolls through the camera is post-production. So it's
Post-production.
your job to get
Yeah.
it from that to on the air. On
Yeah, so I
NBC.
mean, you know, I worked with scoring and looping and dubbing and all voiceovers and all of that stuff. And Rockford had a wonderful thing where the early show, that show in the 70s, Garner had an answering machine, which you recall they were rather new then. And it would come on and he would say, this is Jim Rockford, leave your message. And I had the job early on of coming up with all of those, or most of those, not all of them, but most of those answers to the machine that you hear in the beginning of that show.
At the tone, leave your name and message. I'll get back to you.
Jim, it's Norma at the market. It bounced. You want us to tear it up, send it back, or put it with the other?
Hey, Jim, this is Louie down at the fish market. You gonna pick up these halibut or what?
Hey, Rockford, very funny. I ain't laughing.
That's so cool. I love that.
And I quickly learned that I liked what the producers did. I had a very, you know, now there are 10, 12, 15 of us who produce because television got much more complicated. Then there were only 3 or 4 of us, and they were such pedagogical, wonderful people who got me into screening rooms and writing rooms and casting sessions. I just learned a lot. And that's how, and a year or two after 3 years after I was an associate, David Chase came on, and we both got moved up to producer at the same time. Him as a writer.
He's the writer-creator of The Sopranos, and he's an
of course, he's done
amazingly
many other
talented
things.
writer.
Very talented guy. And between he and Steve Cannell and Mita and Juanita, I just had the most wonderful time of my life. And that's how I segued into it. And from that show, Universal liked me enough. You know, one of the things I think that's been good is I applied myself. I worked hard, and Universal kept me on, and I did a pilot I did the pilot of Simon & Simon after that, and with Phil DeGuerre. And
Phil DeGuerre.
I produced. They did 2 pilots. I produced the second one, and then I did another pilot with Telly Savalas. It was called Hellinger's Law. It was after Kojak. It was really Kojak as a lawyer, and it didn't go. Simon & Simon sold. And then I got a chance. Jim Garner was going to reprise Brett Maverick over at Warner Brothers. I had been at Universal for almost 10 years. And they called me and said, you want to come work with us and be one of the producers on the show? And I couldn't resist it because Jim had been wonderful to me, and Mita was there. And so I went over to Warner Brothers and became a producer on that show. And one of the people I hired was someone you know very well, is Mark Horowitz. And he had been an editor.
Right. He calls you the sensei.
Yeah. And he ended up coming over and being one of the producers on the show with me. He may have started out as an associate, I'm not sure. But anyway, that was my second job. And that only lasted a year because NBC thought it skewed too old. And while in the interim, maybe 2 or 3 months later, I got a call from Don Bellisario, and he was working on a series called Magnum. And
well, before you get there, because I want to get to that, but I just want to talk a little bit about this time at Universal, because Stephen Cannell, Phil DeGuerre, who you mentioned, who later went on to produce a TV show called Whiz Kids, which my brother starred in.
Which your brother was in, yeah.
Yeah, and then Phil came and wrote on JAG for a little while. But like this group at Universal seemed to blossom, and including Don. Like, obviously, Don was working on Baba Black Sheep. Glenn, why do I forget? Glenn Larson was there.
Yeah.
They were creating a lot of great TV shows, and it seems like there's this group of people that kind of then, like a dysphoria, went off into the industry, creating all of these great TV shows. What was it like to work? I mean, you mentioned him briefly, but it's like David Chase is another legend, and it's like he's a staff writer on Rockford.
Yeah. Well, he started at Universal as a staff writer on a show with Darren McGavin. I can't remember the name of it.
It's called Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Yes.
Yeah.
And David
I did an episode of that.
David was a story editor on that before he moved over to Rockford. So, you know,
Oh my God.
But you're right. You hit on something that's very important for people to know. Universal was the studio at the time in television. And they created, and they must have done the reason I got to work as a production coordinator on so many shows was they had 16, 17, 18 shows on the air. And they had all these producers, Roy Huggins, who co-created the Rockford Files, Mita, Steve, David, Glenn Larson, and there were many others. William Sackheim, what's his name?
Harv Bennett.
Harv Bennett, yeah. All of those people, George Eckstein, Dean Hargrove, and Steve Bochco, I can't forget. They were all there. And Bochco and Bellisario and Cannell were on the younger side. Of course, they went off and did all
I never knew
things.
Bochco as at Universal. I always think of him as the 20th guy, but yeah.
No, he was at Universal with Cannell and Bellisario. They were like the whiz kids. And Cannell and Bochco were younger. Don was a little older because Don started a little older. But they just and they learned from all these other wonderful producers. In my time of working at Universal, I worked with and Lincoln Levinson. I can't forget them because they created Columbo, as you know, and so many other wonderful things. Murder, She Wrote, and so.
Well, and also Universal was doing that movie rotation mystery.
Well, yes,
like Columbo and McCloud.
McCloud, and there's many others.
More. Yeah,
there are more.
They did.
There are many more. I later worked on another version of that at ABC, later, but Universal created it. Name of the Game. Remember that?
Right.
You were too young, but Universal was just awesome. They were the big 10-pound gorilla in television, and if you were there at that time, you learned a lot. And if you were lucky enough to work with these producers, who were willing to teach you, not everybody was, but most were, and you stuck your nose to the wheel and the grindstone. I just learned a lot, and I forgot to tell you that the reason Don called me is I ended up being one of the producers. Well, I guess I was the producer. I can't remember now.
For Black Sheep?
On Black Sheep, yeah. Which Don, I only did the pilot. Don came over later in the series, but because we were all in the same area, I'd met him and I knew him. So when he started Magnum, I didn't do the first year, but I was doing that Brett Maverick series. But they needed a change of pace, and they called me up, and he called and said, "We want to come do the show." And I worked with him for many years after that. It was just my first of many shows.
Yeah. I just have a couple questions on Black Sheep because it's interesting. A lot of people, a lot of these successful guys, Don included, and yourself, they'll work with someone and if they can work well with them, then they work with them a lot. Black Sheep is Jeff McKay was in Black Sheep. WK was in Black Sheep. All these guys that, you kind of like you gather along the way. Just a weird side question, because I watched Black Sheep when it was on. I loved it. I used to swim with his son, with
Dirk Blocker.
No, what's his name? The lead of the show.
I know you're talking about the Adams kid. Was that hit? Because he was a regular. He was on that show later.
He wasn't on the show. It was just his kid. The Pappy Bollington, the guy who played Pappy Bollington.
Robert Conrad.
Robert Conrad was in my swim class. So I watched Black Sheep, and I fell in love with Black Sheep.
Yeah.
And your name, I know I'm nesting all these questions.
Yeah, that's okay.
Sorry. Chaz Floyd Johnson is such a recognizable name. I recognized it all the time. Donald P. Bellisario. I recognized it all the time. Where does Chaz Floyd Johnson come from? I know you as Charles. Is it a SAG thing?
I'll tell you what. For years I was Charles Johnson, but my middle name was Floyd. I thought when I got in the business, it was such a common name. There was a football player, there was a a baseball player, there was a judge, and there was a writer, all named Charles Johnson. In fact, two writers. One was a novelist, one was a TV writer. And I thought, I got to find some way to make myself distinctive. No, who knows? So I told my mother and father I was going to change my name, and they swore they were never going to speak to me again. So then I thought, Chaz is an abbreviation for Charles, and if I add Floyd to it, and I keep that as Chaz Floyd Johnson. People will know the difference, and it made all the difference in the world because there never turned out to be another Chaz Floyd Johnson in the business. So I got
worked on me because when I mean, again, we're all over the place already. When I got the audition to read for JAG, it said, written by Donald P. Bellisario, and it also said Chaz Floyd Johnson.
Right.
I'm like, these are names I know from Magnum and from all the shows that I've watched. One other name thing, Baba Black Sheep to Black Sheep Squadron. It's kind of rare. I mean, it happened a lot in your career, Navy, NCIS to NCIS.
Yeah.
Why the change on Baba Black Sheep?
I don't remember because you remember I didn't stay on that series. I only did the pilot, although I was intimately connected with those guys because I met all the Jeff McKay and Bob Ginty and John Larroquette and WK and Dirk Walker and Larry Minetti later. I knew all of them, and I stayed in touch with them all over. The Jimmy Whitmore too. I think
he's a great director and a great actor. Yeah.
Yeah. I think what happened was when they decided to add the women to the series. Remember, it was Black Sheep, Baba Black Sheep,
right?
And then it was Black. And I think when the women came in, they thought they needed another title for it. That's my recollection. Is why they went from Black Sheep to Baba Black Sheep to Black Sheep Squadron. And there may have been some other legal thing, I don't know, but that's my guess on it. But I wanted to just tell you that that was extraordinary because I had, again, been in the military, and I was now on a military show. So I feel a lot of my my prior life helped me in this new burgeoning career I was in.
We'll be back after these messages. Have you ever thought about becoming an actor and making your friends and family jealous? Well, have I got a deal for you. Here at Working Actors School, we offer many different classes so you can become a famous actor like me. And we have a delightful selection of classes, including Adult Weekly. It's every Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. Here you will learn how to be an actor with other adults. How do we do it? How is it possible? Is it a miracle? Yes, it is. A miracle called Zoom. We teach everything online so you can become a famous actor and impress your friends and family. So if you want to be a famous actor and make your friends and family jealous, then you need to sign up at Working Actors School. You can get a hold of us at workingactorschool.com. You can sign up for classes at workingactorschool.com. You can make a reservation for the class online at workingactorschool.com. So come check us out. It's workingactorschool.com. Act 2, Success. We'll talk about Don for sure along the way here, but this is where you meet him, but then you go back off and work with James Garner on the Rockford movies.
Yeah.
And just, I love James Garner. He was on another show you made called First Monday, and I got to be, because it's kind of in the JAG universe. Definitely they were next to us when we were shooting, and I got to watch him work, and I was so inspired by his classy quality and the fact that he never left the set, and he's James Garner.
Yeah.
It's like you would think that the biggest star that we'd worked with would be off in his trailer, but no, James is right next to the camera, ready to go to work. What was it like to work with a guy like that?
Once in a lifetime experience. There are, Patrick, you've been in the business a long while, and me a little longer, and we meet a lot of people in this business. We meet a ton of people, and I've met a ton of actors, and they've become my friends and mentors and acquaintances. But there are just a tiny few who are special. And Garner was one of those. He loved what he did. He loved making it look like it was easy. Watching him is like someone reading the phone book, because but what people didn't know is he studied a lot. He would sit by that camera and in that chair, and he would study, and he would run lines with his actors. But when he got on camera, it was like talking to an old friend. That's just how the genius of his work. And he did some 50 movies as well as several television shows. And he was kind. He loved his crew. I worked later, as you know, with Tom Selleck, and I worked later with Mark Harmon, both who talk about what an incredible influence he had on their careers. And so I find that interesting.
I know that Tom was on Rockford Files in the character I think David Chase created, which I freaking love.
No, actually, Cannell
But-
created it.
Cannell, so
Lance
he was like the
Wyatt.
perfect detective compared to Jim's shambling detective.
Exactly. It was.
Where did Mark work with James Garner? Did he or did he just know of him?
I don't know if they worked together, but they talked quite a bit. They were friendly, and I think Mark is wonderful, as you know, because you worked with him not only on NCIS, but you worked with him on Summer School, and maybe other things. Mark is one of those actors and one of those human beings who loves our industry and loves people who he feels are good examples of what you do in industry. And somehow he and Garner ended up. And I sat in his trailer many a time and talked about his conversations with Garner. So I found it interesting to work with three of those guys, but they all were kind of connected. And both Tom and Mark and Jim were great examples for, as you know, for their cast and their crews. And a lot of that
there's a couple of jobs that it's interesting. You'll know better than I will as a producer. When there's a term called number one on the call sheet. You're the first person listed on the call sheet because you're in everything, so you're always going to be the first one listed. Yeah. And I split it down the middle. There are actors who are stars of a show who they're number one on the call sheet, but they don't act like number one. And then there are guys that act like number one, like Harmon and Tom and James, where Harmon's a quarterback, so he's literally being a quarterback, on the show, where they kind of take on the responsibility of being the level to set at, where they inhabit that number one feeling of like, this is how we do it here in order for everyone. Like they lead by example. Yeah. Do you have any thoughts on that idea?
Well, I think those are the shows that often are most successful. Not every show. There's exceptions for, but the shows that are most successful have the leaders who really believe that they must embrace their team. They must set the example. Harmon, for example, was almost always the first person on the set in the morning.
Yeah,
I mean, he would beat sometimes the crew, and he would be always knew his lines and always kind of treated people right. And if Mark didn't feel that someone was treating someone properly, he addressed it, and you quickly learned how to do that. But that was true of Tom and Jim as well. So I think that some of the success of these shows, because these were all successful shows I was on that lasted a long time, have to do with leadership. Another person that I worked with, and I never worked with her except as a guest star on Magnum, was Carol Burnett. But she was another one of those leaders. And, she just believed in treating everybody fairly. And so I have a hierarchy of some of those people, and I've worked with some of them who didn't do that. But these people, I was very lucky with. I'm working on a memoir, and one of the things I want to talk about in the memoir is that kind of leadership in the business, and how it, enriches the business and enriches the people in the shows they work on.
Well, it's a direct connection to your job, because as the producer, if your number one is causing issues or being a problem, then that's your number one thing you got to take care of every day, which means that all the rest of the things on your list have to take second place. So it's got to be easier for you if you've got a teammate.
Well, listen, I think that's part of what I valued so much, is that they made your life easier. Right. Because if number one didn't do it, nobody else, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Why do I have to do it if blank doesn't do it?
Yeah.
Number one
and so that made the job easier. And, I was one of the things I valued and that I learned from Garner and Cannell and Harmon and Tom and all, is that you have to be a partner with them. When I first started now, I was very new. I was a little trepidatious about, these are stars. I had seen them, on the tube, and, they were bigger than life in many ways, and Garner was a movie star, and Tom later became a movie star, and Harmon did movies. So they were big. But I had to learn that I was their partner. And the good news is they made me with the other producers who we worked with, they made us partners. So you didn't. I lost that fear. I lost that feeling like, whatever. Now that didn't mean that I didn't give them great props and whatever, because I did. But I also knew that when the time came, I couldn't be Charles Johnson in awe of Garner or
Right.
anybody else. I had to be the producer working with them, and they accepted that, and that helped me grow.
So let's get to before we get to Magnum, which we're just going to get to. I want to talk about Don Bellisario just for a minute. Like I said, I was a Don Bellisario fanboy, Chaz Johnson fanboy, to be honest, too, because I recognized your name on the show. But I could always tell a Don script. I remember watching Black Sheep. I remember him from Battlestar Galactica. You said he was like this wunderkind. He was like an older dude who came in, decided to write, and he's just a really great writer. One of the other things about Don is he is like one of the best personalities I've ever met. He's the guy that chomping on a cigar. He's going to tell you how he's going to do it, and here's how we're going to go about it and how to do it. And I thought you guys were such the perfect match for the yin and yang. Here's this big blustery guy who's super talented, who can be super opinionated, and you can take him or leave him. I love him. But I can also see why people would say, just calm down, Don. Meanwhile, you're like kind of like, not quiet, but calm, like just being there to take care of shit. So there's this character, Don Bellisario. There's this guy. You meet him. What's your first impression of Don when you guys first hooked
Well,
up on
because
Black
I had worked on a lot with him, he was already kind of a well known as being a tough guy and a blustery guy, as you said, before I ever worked with him. And so I knew that about him. So when I met with him and talked about working with him, I was pretty nervous because there were people who came and went with him. You didn't always last. And I was nervous about that. And he assured me that he was going to be fair to me. And, I said, I don't want to come on this show and be fired. And he said, that's not going to happen. And of course, it never did. But here's the thing about him. He was tough to work for, but deep down inside, I found that there was a really good guy there and a really talented man there. And as you said, a Don Bellisario script was a Don Bellisario script. I tell that story about the fact that, he would write sometimes not knowing where he was going with the story and write himself into a corner, and then the script would come out and it would be brilliant. That was just who he was. He was also a brilliant editor. I think because he had worked in, before he came to our business, he had worked in advertising. And he had to create, 30-second, 60-second, whatever, scenarios with a beginning, middle, and end. So he kind of knew what that had to be. And he was a journalism major at Penn State. So he was already there. So the talent was there. But I was much more calm, as you know, than he was. And I think the reason that I
are.
Thank you. And the reason I think I ended up on 5 of his shows was because we balanced it. Because he could blow up, the entire thing if he wanted to, but someone always had to be there to kind of calm people down and say, this is the way we do it. And Don was always about, it has to be right. If it's not right, it's not going to last. And in some ways, sometimes
I hate to interrupt, but I think that's really important to point out because he's this great big Hollywood character, but he was always angry about either the quality or what was being done or about the show. It never seemed like it was about Don.
No.
It wasn't like, I deserve respect. It's like, this character, that's not right. You got to fix it.
That's who he was. And so, I understood that. And I understood a lot of times when he would kind of, upset the network or the studio because he wanted to reshoot or he wanted to redo things. I understood where it was coming from. And, I was able to kind of be in between. There was a time, I don't think Don knows this, but there was a time when Paramount called me St. Charles because I was able to sometimes go in and calm the waters. But it worked well. And I did Magnum with him. Then I did then I did Jag, First
Quantum.
Monday,
But you did Quantum in
NCIS,
between, right?
and and maybe there were 5 of them. Oh, Quantum Leap.
Quantum. Yeah.
So Quantum Leap was my shortest. I only did the last year of that show because I was
because of Rockford, or where was
that was
going
because
on?
of Rockford. I was doing those Rockford movies, and I wasn't available to go to work on Quantum Leap when they started,
And so that's why Airwolf and Gold Monkey and you were working in
I was
James
doing
Garner
something
now.
else. Yeah.
So, okay, so you get to Magnum, and so Magnum is this, the way I always heard it was Glenn Larson had this script, Don took it out over the weekend, created Magnum PI out of it. They wanted a show in Hawaii because Hawaii Five-0 was ending, and they wanted to use the studios. And so the show's created, and then what happens? How do you get involved in that from your?
Well, I didn't do the first season because I was not available.
Right.
And Don, Don wrote that script, as you know. It was a very different script that Glenn Larson had written, and Glenn had had some success over at Universal, but that script.
And they had worked together on Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, they did, but that script was a little more girls on the beach and that kind of thing. And it was a good script because Glenn was a good writer, but it was a very different thing. And I gather that Selleck, who was hot after Lance White on Rockford, and Universal was trying to find something for him, read the script. They wanted him to do it, and he said, I don't think I want to do that. And so they then looked around and said, we got this new writer on the lot, and it was Don. He did take it over a short period of time and totally transformed that script into an amazing thing. It was the first show, I believe, was called Don't Eat the Snow in Hawaii, and it's a brilliant pilot. And but he was in L.A. and the show was in Hawaii, and they had some problems with the producers on it. So by the time they began the end of the second year, they felt they needed to bring someone in, and that's how the call came. I went in, and I was supposed to be the producer in L.A., just working with Don to try and help the show. I went over to Hawaii with Robert Harris and Betty McCart, who was Tom's agent. Robert Harris was in the studio for just a week to meet everybody, and this is Charles Johnson, whatever. While I was there, one of the producers either got fired or quit. I don't remember how that all happened. And they said to me, could you stay for a week or two until we find somebody? And I said, and initially I said, well, I don't know. Of course, I'm in Hawaii, right? And secretly I was going, oh, this is great. But I ended up staying, and the rest is history. I stayed over there for the remaining 6.5 years.
I'm so sorry, Charles. What a horrible situation you found yourself in. You're on a top 10 show in Hawaii. It's, an iconic show at the time. You have the ability, not only joining in on the second season of that and Jag and a bunch of other ones where it's sort of like you come in and help steady the ship, but like with Rockford and Magnum, good old Mike Post, you got theme songs that are classic songs.
Yeah. Well,
just an amazing.
He's an amazing musician. He's been around forever. A wonderful composer, and he was very hot at that time. And that both songs, both the Magnum and the Rockford themes, went on to become top 10 or top 20 hits. I don't remember at the time. And then Mike went on later to work with Dick Wolf, and that Law and Order thing. So there was a lot of wonderful talent, and I just got lucky to be plopped into the middle of some of it. I will tell you this: you talk about my demeanor. I think one of the things that allowed me to work so long and fruitfully is that I got along with people, and like you, I like people, and I'm kind to people. I was bright enough to understand that and understand how to make that work. So I got along not only with almost all of the producers and writers I worked with, but also the cast. That's not always easy. And
No, and everyone can tell in Hollywood. Everyone talks about Hollywood phonies. If they're not in Hollywood, yeah, for sure, everyone in Hollywood's phony. That's not true.
That's
but
not
there
true.
are phonies in Hollywood, and you can see them from a mile away, which you're not. Which is why guys like Tom or anyone else who is working with you knows that you're a man of your word. You're kind of like a solid guy, so that if you say, "We'll work on it, we'll get this fixed," I believe you because you have the goods to back it up. When you're doing a show like Magnum PI, so this is really, I'm joking that, oh, you had it easy. Your job was a lot harder because the writers were in LA.
Yeah.
The production was in Hawaii. And also casting, you're having to arrange travel arrangements for all the actors. You're having to do all of these things where you're on almost a feature level production schedule weekly. How is it to produce that show?
Well, it was not easy. But I learned a lot. I leaned a lot on a lot of people who did it. Remember when Magnum started, computers were not very much in use. So the writing would be done in LA, and we would have to, if the pages had to be shot the next day, we had to get the pages to LAX by 11 o'clock to make an 11 o'clock Pan Am flight. It was Pan Am at the time. That was the last flight out to Hawaii. That got into Hawaii about 7 o'clock in the morning. And if the pages didn't make it, we didn't have the pages. Because faxes
were you ever on a phone at 3 a.m. going, and then what does he say?
Yeah. And so, whatever. And I had, and then the writers weren't in Hawaii either. It was me without writers. And, I've been around screens. I'm not a writer. So Tom Selleck or John Hillerman or Roger or Larry would have notes. And then I would get on the phone with the writers and try to convey those notes. And sometimes the writers would say, well, what do they really want? And I would try to, but it wouldn't work. So the next year I was there, I said, I have to have a writer in Hawaii with me all the time, or it's not going to work. And fortunately,
not the writer of the episode, but just a staff writer there.
Just a staff writer.
The writing duties. Okay.
Now you're very intuitive there, because eventually the staff writer became Chris Abbott, who from
So
Little House on the Prairie, and she was with me all the time, and we became like partners. But then we both decided that we had to have the writer of the episode fly over when their episode started to prep and stay through till it's shot, and that was added expense. But they agreed with us, and so those are the things that we got. And eventually computers came in, and we made those things work, and faxes came in, and so. But early on, there was all of that, as well as you say, transportation and housing and per diem and all the other things that you have to deal with in a show. So I grew a lot during those days. I went from the producer to supervising producer in Hawaii to the co-executive producer of the show, and I think I had one other title in that time. And the show went from a top 10 show to, in the third season I was there, it became the number 3 show on the air, and stayed that way until Cosby came out. Yeah.
Do you have any insights on the whole Indiana Jones Tom Selleck thing? I mean, the classic story goes that he wasn't allowed to do it because Don wouldn't let him out of the contract, but he's on a hit show. Like, what are they going to do?
Actually, Don didn't prevent him. I tell you what little I know, and I, spent 20 years of my life working with George Lucas on a movie called Red Tails. So I got to talk to George a little bit about that. Tom was their first choice, Stephen and George, but Tom had already committed to CBS to do Magnum, and they basically felt like they didn't want to lose him, so they said to Spielberg and Lucas, you can't have him. Now, as it turned out, and Tom will tell you this, it's for a record, there was a strike that year, and the strike lasted 6 months, which means that Tom could have still done the movie. but it was too late. Harrison Ford was cast, and so he didn't get to do it. In his book, Tom has a book out called "You Never Know." I don't know if you've read it.
I have not. Yeah.
It's a memoir. It's a wonderful book, where he talks about my relationship with him on Magnum extensively for about maybe a number of pages, which is so kind of him. But he also talks about whether he had regrets about doing that, and he says he had none. But life is what it is, and he was on a hit show. But that's what happened, and who knows where Tom's career would have gone if he had done the movie, and he still would have maybe had to do the television show. But life throws us its curves, and those are what they are.
He later did a movie that was very similar, and he's great, and I love Tom, but it's like some parts are for other guys. And it works out the way it's supposed to work out. I mean, the Back to the Future story is another great story about, Eric Stoltz and then Michael J. Fox. And it's like, how can you imagine? Yeah. So it's like, but that's interesting. And when you're working on a show like that, where you're away from everything, I'd imagine sometimes you as the producer would have some freedom to do things because, mom and dad, the studio isn't there watching you. What was your favorite thing about working on Magnum out there?
Well, it was very special. My favorite thing probably was learning about Hawaiian culture, learning about Hawaii, which I knew almost nothing about. I think I maybe had been there for a week on a vacation before that. The Hawaiian people are very unique. They have their culture. They have their customs. We would bless the set every year and all of that stuff that sprinkle whatever. But the Hawaiian people were very down to earth, very real, and I came to love them, as did the cast, and there were a number of us from the crew from LA, whatever. I think that my favorite thing was learning about Hawaii and whatever, and working with Tom and John Hillerman. Hillerman was a piece of work. He was so talented. You would have never guessed that he was from Denison, Texas, and not, and you'd think he's read out of somewhere in England.
Yeah.
He was just very good at that. And I actually worked with him when I was in Washington, D.C., trying to study and act. As I worked as a lawyer, I did some work at a repertory theater where he was a star at. So cut to years later, I go to Magnum, and there he is. I didn't know him very well then, but I did work with him before. But that was my favorite thing, and probably my favorite time on a show, because I got to spend 9 months a year or 8 months a year in paradise.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I mean, that obviously, I'm so glad you said that, because so many people might just go, it was really difficult in Hawaii. It's hot. It's like, calm down. It's interesting. As I said, I was such a huge Magnum fan, and I think one of the first questions I had for Don was, was Robin Masters? It's like, it's an obsession of mine. But I recognize, and you recognize Don's style so well. Same thing, when we're talking about writers, Scott Gemmell, Steven Zito, I could take the name off. You can know who wrote these scripts, at least on JAG, and with Don, he had, like I said, this cast of characters, Jeff McKay being one of them, whose character's name was Mac, who then he blew up and then he brought back, which is still my favorite single episode of television. Did you see The Sunrise?
Yeah.
And when I got cast on JAG, I went, before he was cast as my father, I said to myself, okay, Don Bellisario, this is the Mac character. Bud is that character to Harm's Magnum. Is how I kind of saw it. Because I was cast in the pilot. I wasn't cast in the show until you joined in the second season.
Right.
So you do, but getting back to you, since this is about you, you did mention, before I get too far away from it, Red Tails. I had the chance to work with Anthony Hemingway, who directed the movie. You want to talk a little bit about Red Tails? I mean, as a fan of George, I knew about it for a long time. It took forever to get out, and then it didn't get the recognition that I felt that it should have. It was a really
It
good
did
movie.
not. It did not. Patrick, as an African American producer, and I never factored that much into my career. It was what it was, and whatever. But when I got the call from George to come meet with him about a project, I was blown away by the fact that he wanted to do something on the Tuskegee Airmen, and I had been working on, all of these shows that were cop shows and detective shows and military shows and Western when I did Brett Maverick, but they were all shows with white leads, and so here was a show suddenly that was going to deal with African Americans and their history, and their place in society, and I thought, how lucky can I be? It was a difficult project to get going because George wanted to do it all on his own. He did not want to do it with studios in the beginning, and he wanted to develop it and finance it. And he had a very unique idea of what he wanted to do, which is why it took so long to do it, but it had a long history. But what he wanted to do was a movie that really appealed to young people, the young people who liked Star Wars, who liked Indiana Jones. That was the audience he was going for. So he really wanted much more of a movie that was a dogfight movie, which I think he did brilliantly in terms of what the feature is. But it didn't always capture the history in the way that critics and other people would like it. But I think it's a wonderful movie. Hemingway was a relatively new director, but George and Rick McCallum liked him a lot, the only other producer on it with us. And
it's so funny. When I worked with them on the O.J. Simpson movie, and I had a day with him. That was it.
Yeah.
And it was after Jag, and I remember thinking that he reminded me of you because he is a young guy.
Yeah.
But had a very calm demeanor. He's just like that heavy ship in a really rough sea. And every set, no matter how good it is, if you don't have a calm director, or a guy that knows what he's doing, and that's what he reminded me of. He always knew what his shot was. He always knew what he wanted, which as an actor is just like a godsend.
That's a godsend.
It was so funny that you guys got to work together. How did George find you? Was it the Universal connection? What was it that I know George had American Graffiti at Universal. That's the only connection I can think of. But how did he find you?
He had a development person who he charged with going out. He wanted to find a black producer, a black writer, and a black director. That was his, I want that on this movie. And so then she started looking and talking around Hollywood to people she knew, and she just happened to talk to several people who knew me and said, have you talked to Charles Johnson yet? And then she went back to George and said, I've talked to da-da-da-da, and they all mentioned Charles Johnson. And so that's how I got up to see him. And when I left him after my first interview, I said, George, it's so nice to meet you. If I ever get a chance to work with you, that would be great. And he said, what are you talking about? He said, you got the job. And I said, well, how did you decide that? He said, well, I heard so much about you. I just needed to see if you had two heads, and you don't. So you're fine. So anyway, we had a great relationship, and I don't see him much as I used to. But the movie ended up getting 2 NAACP Image Awards as Best Film, so that was great. It didn't get the commercial attention, and George put a lot of money into it.
We'll be back after these messages. Hey there, I'm Patrick Labyorteaux, and I've been an actor since I was a little kid, so I know what it's like to be a little kid actor. So I have a class here called Youth Weekly, and that meets every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific, and it is an awesome class if you are young and want to learn all about acting. We have a great set of kids, and it's taught on Zoom, so you can do it from anywhere. You can do it on your phone, you can do it on your laptop, on an iPad. It's awesome. I've had kids take a class while they were in the car coming back from soccer practice. I swear to you. So if acting is in your blood, come to workingactorschool.com and check out the Youth Weekly class every Tuesday at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. I'll see you there. Act 3, present day. But you've got Quantum Leap, Jag, NCIS, which is like, will it ever stop? And I'm taking way too much of your time, but I gotta, what was it like working on Quantum Leap. You said you only did 22 episodes, but still, that was another
Well,
super
that was
popular
another.
show.
Well, first of all, working with Scott Bakula and Dean Stockwell was awesome.
Yeah.
And Scott was one of the nicest people I worked with. But that was a tough show because they didn't have permanent sets. They had only that, whatever that thing was, that whatever, and everything else was pretty much
And no
built.
permanent time.
Yes,
You had to be
And-
a period
and-
different a period. You couldn't build up a wardrobe warehouse of
Exactly.
the same
And,
wardrobe.
oh God, and so that was a whole nother unique experience in trying to do that, and I learned a lot of how to do that. And anyway, it was fascinating, but mostly because it was Don's creation and Don's hard work, and we had wonderful writers, as you know. Deborah Pratt was on it, and so many others. You mentioned one other thing. You mentioned other writers that were on JAG. I just have to tell you, people like Scott Gemmell and Stephen Zito were really, really, really talented writers. And of course, Scott went on to do ER, and now he's doing The Pit, as you know, and doing it successfully well. So I have worked with so many wonderful writers, and many of them have gone on to do other things, and it's just good to see that in a business that changes and can be volatile and sometimes hard to maintain a job in, that a lot of them have gone on to work, and I've worked steadily until this year. 22 seasons on NCIS is unheard of, and it's still going, as you say.
Seriously. Okay, so quickly, we did 10 years of JAG together. We're finally getting to it. We won't take 10 years talking about it. How did you get into JAG? And I mean, it sounded like you were triage. Like JAG was this big sprawling show on NBC.
Yeah.
I felt more like Magnum than like what JAG ended up being, where Harm was kind of like the hero as instead of like an ensemble. They get canceled on NBC for reasons, and then we're on CBS and they bring you in. How did that all happen?
Well, basically because I think Carrie McCluggage, who was the head of television at that time, and whoever else was there, remembered my working with Don on Magnum, and they thought I could be helpful on that show, and they were now changing networks and changing the premise to be more of an ensemble as opposed to, as you said, the hero thing. And I think I was just a natural person because they all knew me, and they were now at Paramount, and Don and Carrie and Gary Hart were all over and moved over, and they thought the natural progression once I became available after those Rockford movies was to move me over there, and that's how I became involved. And that literally led to 9 years on that show and a 10-year show, and you and I both had a 9-year run. And during the end of that, I ended up doing both JAG and First Monday. And because I First Monday only lasted that season, but actually a total of 13 hours. But it was a wonderful show. The brilliance of Don and Paul Levine and Joe Mantegna, Charles Durning, Jim Garner again. And
were you the reason Jim is on First Monday? I would imagine that you made a phone call.
kind of. In a room, we talked about it, and I think maybe I can't remember. I was the person who came with, but because I knew him, it was a natural thing to go to him, and I wasn't sure he was going to do it, because first of all, he was playing the Chief Justice, who was somewhat of a conservative, and that's not who Garner was in real life. He was very much the liberal, but he did play it, and he played it well, and Durning was a rock, and Mantegna was a rock, and then there was a wonderful cast. It was and it was good for me because I love the fact that we attacked legal,
once again, law.
And we had a great younger cast. It was wonderful. But I did those two, and then NCIS came along, and so I suddenly segued from JAG to First Monday, and then doing both of them at the same time. and live to tell the story. But it was only natural, I think, that I had been on with Don so long that it was. I think nobody questioned it. Is you're doing NCIS, and that was.
And why is that? Because obviously you've figured out. People have figured out JAG. Not that it runs up on its own. It's still a working job every day, but that NCIS is different than JAG. It's shot different. It's got a bigger cast. It's got all these other things, moving parts. And so they want the varsity over on that show and make sure that it gets going the way they want it.
And because I had the familiarity with the studio, with Don, and then I had met Harmon, and he seemed to take a liking to me. And the one good thing is that my reputation is of somebody who gets it done and works with people, and Harmon heard that. And so I think that's how it all came about. And then there was a time when things were not easy on that show, and I was always there for everybody, including Don and Mark and everybody. So I just never thought it would last that long. I thought it would maybe go 5 years, 7 years.
Right.
Who knew?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's being positive. There's you, Dick Wolf, and I don't know who else. I mean, maybe whoever's on Special Victims Unit. There's a few handful of people that have produced as many TV shows episodes as you have.
Well,
what's the secret?
Well, I've been lucky. Remember, Dick Wolf and Don Bellisario were creators, and there are a few of us. Aaron Spelling used to have a second man, and Spaccio used to have it. There are a few of us who get onto these shows with these creators where we last and end up having, a thing of I've got 1,000 shows or more. But that's because I've been on with these guys.
If I put a gun to your head, you wouldn't take credit for anything. It's like, well, the people around me are really great. It's like, you saved that burning baby. Well, the baby was really trying to save itself as well. It's like you're hysterical in that you won't do it. But I will tell the people here what a great producer you are, because one of the things a producer needs to do is, again, be that rock, like we were talking about with Hemingway. You got to have that sense of, for every firebrand great, incredible, bright, burning creator to Don Bellisario, you've got you behind going, it's going to be okay. We're going to figure it out. I got a plan. And it's like, I love the combination that you guys have, because it is that type of combination. And all the creators, the Gemmels and stuff, and the people on NCIS as well. Because you can come up with a great idea, but if they don't have a guy like you who knows how to do it and how to get it done and on a budget and on time, I mean, I laugh, and I keep mentioning this on the podcast. People are sick of me tired talking about it, but I love how, Netflix, it's like, we did 8 episodes. It cost $100 million, and it'll be 3 years before we do another one. And you're knocking out 25 episodes a year, or in 10 months of network television.
Well, and you said this earlier, television, when you're doing 25, 24, whatever they do now, and sometimes it's 18 and 20 now, but when you do that many episodes in 7, 8, 9 months, it's like doing a little feature every month, every 7 or 8 days. That's really what you're doing. And all those things that you do in a feature, that when it's done, or a miniseries or whatever, you got to get that done expertly and whatever, and hope that every episode turns out to be, something good. And as you know, in 24 episodes, not everyone is a gem. It's just not possible because you're working so fast. But if you can get, 50 to 60% of them that are really good, and the others are what they are, you're happy. And there are some shows in their first couple of years that just are so good that almost everything they do is good, and then as the curve goes,
your friend David Chase again.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, Jesus, man, have a bad episode.
But anyway, so I don't take a lot of credit, but I do take credit for the fact that I worked hard, I learned and I applied what I learned in conjunction with other people, and that's what got me to be where
Well,
I
I
am.
think that's a great definition for a producer because I think you are the preeminent television producer. Your credits prove it. Your stats prove it, and I saw it. So it's an honor to have worked with you and to have you as a friend. We'll be back after these messages. Hey, I'm Patrick Labyorteaux, and I play an actor on TV, and I've been doing this for a long, long time. And I know what it's like if you are in a class with people, and sometimes you just want to have that one-on-one connection with the person that you're working with to go over, I don't know, a particular scene, or maybe you have an audition, or maybe you just want the privacy to try stuff that you don't really know is going to work and not have anyone look at you. Well, I have the perfect solution for you. It's called One-on-One with Patrick Labyorteaux. You can book your time at workingactorschool.com, and it's just me and you for an hour going over whatever it is you want to work on, breaking down the script, talking about character, figuring out your intention, the spine of the scene, everything that goes in to making a dynamite performance. So if you're interested in acting and want that one-on-one personal attention, check out One-on-One with Patrick Labyorteaux. You can find all the information you need at workingactorschool.com. Act 4, questions. And so we're going to go into the questions. This is very easy, very quick.
Okay.
These are questions called Tina's Gotta Know, because Tina, my wife, who you know and worked with, came up with these questions. So the first question is called That's Showbiz, and it's, what is the most Hollywood moment in your life?
That's interesting. I think probably for me it's when I won my first Emmy, because I would have never ever imagined that I was going to be at the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, a nominee, then a winner, on stage, accepting my award, and then I remember going down the aisle. Lou Gossett was on one side, and he had been on Rockford. Rita Moreno was on the other, and they both grabbed my hands as I was going down the aisle to get on the stage. And I remember because it was so surreal. And then I think that probably is. And there's a famous picture it's on the internet of me and Mita and David and Steve with our Emmys. That probably is my most. I've had a few, but that was probably my most Hollywood moment.
But you can't beat an answer that starts with, when I won my first Emmy. That's awesome. Okay, number 2, that's Showbiz, part 2. What's the most embarrassing Hollywood moment in your life?
Oh, boy. So one night we were shooting, I believe it was JAG or NCIS, I can't remember. And it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was one of those days when I had been at work 12, 14, 15 hours. And I went off in a corner to kind of just get away from it all and whatever. And I fell asleep. And I think I started snoring. And they had to cut, they cut, and they were trying to figure out where it was coming from. And of course, I didn't fess up. I think some of them knew, but nobody ratted me out. That may be my most embarrassing moment.
We've actually all been there in some form of that story, but it would be hysterical. They come around looking, they see you there, and you're like going, I don't know, he didn't come by you. He didn't come by me.
Wasn't
I don't
me.
know where it's coming from. It wasn't me. Okay, number 3, show me the money. What is your biggest missed financial opportunity?
There was a time when producers were going to get royalties. And because the Producers Guild was not considered a regular union, because it was collective bargaining.
Management.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so Lou Wasserman and maybe Barry Diller or something, one was running Universal, one was running Paramount, came up with the idea that they were going to start to give producers royalties. and they agreed to do it for 2 years. But the other, 7 or 5 or 6 or 7 studios had to agree to do it, and then it would become codified as law. Well, I got royalties on my shows for 2 years, and then the other studio said, no, we're not doing it. So, it was my chance to have, that kind of extra financial
persistent income.
assistance that didn't happen. But I was not alone. All of the producers at Universal and Paramount were lucky for that time, but it went away, and so I didn't get that. And I've gotten money and royalties and residuals as an actor, because I have a few credits, not a lot. I get like $10.
Well, we had a scene on Jag. It was the best scene ever shot on film.
I don't know if you know that story of on Jag, when I played the toxicologist with Trisha Yearwood a few times. I was doing an interview with a young man in D.C., and it was near the White House, and there was a helicopter going, and he couldn't hear, and he said, "What's your full name?" And I said, Jazz Floyd Johnson. Well, he thought he heard Jazz Floyd Johnson. Jazzvoyd. And so the article came out that way. And so Steven Zito made me take a credit once on Jag in one of my roles as Jazz Boy Johnson, and then he had a black makeup. So that was pretty funny. And if you sometimes go on IMDb or something, you'll see they put also known as. Whatever.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
I could always tell Steven Zito, one of my favorite things, because in person, he was not a avuncular, funny guy. In script,
not at all.
He was always hysterical. He always said harm, resplendent in his navy whites. He always used that phrase, and I thought that was hysterical. Okay, number 4. As a teenager, what is your favorite poster in your room, and how'd you come to get it?
Well, I know what Tina's favorite poster was, so I know where that comes from. I don't think it was anybody in the movies or television. I think it was probably a poster of a very famous civil rights activist named W.E.B. Du Bois. Okay. And he was, and when I was growing up, we had Negro History Week. It later became Negro History Month, and we would study, James Baldwin and all those people and all the historical people, Booker T. Washington. But W.E.B. Du Bois was somebody I always thought was a wonderful example of where you had to go to improve your life. So I think I had a poster of him in my.
That's awesome. And wasn't Nina related to Nina Bunch Pierce, who worked with us on Jag?
She was Ralph Bunch's granddaughter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that was amazing. And she was Bunch's granddaughter. And, he was extraordinary in terms of what he did during the, settling that the war and all in Israel and everything. He was just an amazing ambassador. So I was impressed
I'm not really good with politics and race relations and everything, but I've got to imagine that while we're talking about this, that you've had a lot of impact in the industry, mainly because you're black, but that has nothing to do with you, which I think then allows for people to understand that all colors work great in this business, and that you led by example. Have you had any experiences like this where you've kind of like seen your effect in the industry?
Yeah, I think what happens is I've led by example. It's I don't dwell on the fact of my color. It's just not important. But I know it's there, and I know that I want to be a role model for other people not only just because of your color, but other young people who come along who want to know how you did it, and what are some of the rules that you feel they need to learn and all. So yeah, I've seen it come along. I've gotten, so I've probably gotten about 20 awards over the years for my work, but some of it I think has been because I've just been a good exemplar in terms of being a producer and in terms of being a good person. The Caucus for Producers, Writers, and Directors, which had a number of those people from Universal that you talked about, gave me 3 awards. The Producers Guild gave me an award in something they had called the Celebration of Diversity, and they gave me an award. So I've gotten some impact of that along the way, but and I try to live up
going
to
back, I guess the interesting part of it would be, because you're talking like you hit the mailroom there, what, in 73, 74, something like that?
71, 72, yeah.
And that was not a very aware time. So
Not at
the
all.
very fact that you were immediately moved up, that must have been a big deal.
That was a big deal. And remember, there weren't a lot of there were African Americans in the industry, but there weren't a lot of African Americans working as producers and writers and directors in behind the scenes. So that I was probably one of the earlier ones to do that. I will mention one thing. You talked about the impact that what you do along the way. One of the people I always looked up to in the industry was Portier, and he was that example of getting the work done, treating people well, and setting a good example. And so many of us in the industry, because Sydney started in the 50s, so many of us look up to him and feel that we stand on his and a lot of other people like that shoulders. But he was just I knew him socially a little bit, and I saw him occasionally at different functions. He was always wonderful, and I always thought that's the kind of person I want to be. So I've tried to.
Well,
carry
in a lot
that
of
over.
ways you are, because take color away from it, just doesn't matter. His classiness, the way that he carries himself, his demeanor, all of those things as a man, you radiate as well. And I think that obviously for a producer, for anyone in this business, and James Garner would be the same, right?
Yeah.
It's that same type of quality type of person. Yeah.
And I'm happy to admit
so,
so many of them. Yeah.
where we go here? Okay, number 5. There's only a couple more. What is the best thing you've ever done? It's called Showdown. It's a showdown. What's the best thing you've ever done? The worst thing you've ever done professionally? Like, what are you the most proud of, and what are you the most embarrassed by?
Oh God, Patrick, do I have to? The best thing for me in television and film was getting to produce 2 things. One was Red Tails, because I went around the country and I met at least 50 Tuskegee Airmen who had been in the war and who'd been flyers, and learn.
Just to
learned
find
their
that many that are
history.
still alive is amazing.
There are very few now. There may be some alive who were later on who weren't pilots but were in the unit. But most, I would say 90% of the pilots are gone. But that was an awesome thing for me. And I also got to produce 7 or 8 years ago the first documentary on Congressman John Lewis, who was, of course, the congressman who walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and got beaten up and ran whatever, and was an incredible man. And I produced those 2 are my favorites. And that, it's hard to say because I've had a lot of best. So, but my worst.
Fair.
Okay, come on. I will say this: I worked on a couple of shows with a couple of actors who shall remain nameless, who I didn't. As good as I am in getting along with people, I didn't always find that they were the easiest people to work with. and I won't mention names.
You don't have to mention names, but I want to understand this just a little bit deeper. So you're working with someone that they're not easy to work with. What do you do? What do you have to do then to like make that to make something out of that, or do you just do the least and move on?
No, I never ever shrugged it off, shirked it off, because in reality, those shows required even more effort, and you couldn't walk away from it. And I never left a show. I never quit a show. I just did my best to understand who they were and try to understand why they approached things and made things more difficult. And and oftentimes I would come to a realization and an understanding that got me to work with them, and sometimes successfully, although I wasn't always a fan of theirs or their personalities or who they were. But not everybody can be a gem. So I've had a couple of those.
Absolutely. And look, I always say, as far as actors go, my theory of acting for movie stars or TV stars is you take a perfectly spherical ball that's all like no dents in it. You place it in a river and the water's going to roll over it and nothing's going to happen. You take that same ball and you dent it and you beat it up, you put it in there and the water's going to spray all over and it's going to be a fantastic show to watch. I think damaged people make really good stars and actors because they have all of these different things happening, but they may not make great people. So you can watch them, but there's the downside too. So
I couldn't have said it better. We've watched actors in television and film, and we've watched sometimes producers and directors who can be enfant terrible or whatever, however, terrible. I'm not a good French, whatever. But we've watched those, and they are so talented that they can be successful, but they oftentimes are not great human beings. And then
they're not successful at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, number 6, no show. It's for an actor. What part did you want but didn't get? But let's rephrase it for you. What show did you really want to have either to be on or get produced that didn't happen?
When I was working with Tom Selleck, and I don't think I've ever told him this, and Chris Abbott, we developed a miniseries written by a wonderful writer named David Chisholm on the Alan Pinkerton, and it was this 8-hour miniseries called The Pinkertons, and I just loved that script. And Moonves was then head of CBS, and he wanted to go with it as long as Tom Selleck would star in it. Well, for some reason, and I will have to ask my friend, who I'm talking to tomorrow, I think, why he never wanted to do it. I've never asked him. But he decided, and he developed it along with us. And it was a wonderful script. And I thought Pinkerton, there wasn't a lot done on the Pinkertons. And it was such an amazing, detective agency in those years. Anyway, Tom decided not to do it, and we tried to find someone else to replace him. And we couldn't agree on it. So it never got done. So that was one of the projects I really wanted to get done that I worked on and never got done.
I can see him in the hat and everything. He's got the great mustache. And plus he's Tom Selleck, which he's just magnetic. That would have been really good. All right, finally, number 9. Okay. I'm skipping over a few because it's like I've kept you so long. But finally, show me some love. What is your favorite performance of mine?
Patrick, I am such a fan of yours. But not only because you are a consummate actor, you are also such a wonderful human being. And I said that to you recently when we ran into each other. You would remember my birthdays, and I go, how does Patrick remember that? But I think the most challenging work I saw you do, and I've seen a lot of your work, was that work in JAG that you did when you lost your legs.
Those are gifts from the writers and from Don. And
yes, but you had to dig deep to show us the pain and the grief and the frustration that came with that result of that injury. And I thought you pulled it off well. You showed great humanity. You showed great resilience. You showed the pain and the difficulty, and it was just a very real thing. And I'll never, I won't forget it. So I loved you in summer school, as you hear a lot from people. But that work on JAG was probably my favorite work.
I count that as some of my best work because it happened. I don't remember the season, but it was like late. It's seventh or eighth season of a TV show. Your entire character changes, and I go from being the comedic relief to having this really dramatic, wonderfully written, wonderfully researched. You guys didn't spare any expense with the effects and with the research that I was able to do, talking to people and understanding that. I'm really proud of that. I'm very honored that you even consider that. Thank you, Charles.
Yeah, I do.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you. I know I kept you longer than I promised, so appreciate that very much. Thank you so much for doing this, Charles. I'm still one of your biggest fans.
I'm thrilled. I was happy to stay longer because I figured you'll call through the tape and come up with the best parts of our conversation. And I wish you great success with it. I love the name of the show. Is it the Patrick Labyorteaux Show? Is that it?
Patrick Labyorteaux Show.
And then you have when I first signed on, there's a thing you've done, advertising the show, a poster. Yeah. And the Labyorteaux Show thing is there, and you're there, and the marquee. It's just lovely. So I'm honored to be one of the people who got to talk with you. Thank you so much.
It's the Patrick Labyorteaux Show. Patrick Labyorteaux. He's the one you gotta know.
Hey everybody, I'm so glad that you're enjoying the podcast and checking it out. It is an audio podcast wherever you get your audio podcast, and it's a video podcast over on YouTube. My socials are all patrick.labyorteaux, and that is on Instagram, on YouTube, on TikTok. I'm everywhere. If you want information on the school, you can go to workingactorsschool.com. We have classes going all the time. It's a lot of fun. I suggest you check it out. Hey, we'll see you next time.
It's the Patrick Labyorteaux Show. Patrick Labyorteaux. He's the one you gotta know.
If you like the show, please take a moment to rate, review, and subscribe. It really does help the show to grow. Thank you for listening.